Hey, everybody. It is Tuesday, June 3rd. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Mo Schwanunu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. On this June 3rd, National Egg Day, I hope you all have an excellent day here. And the good news is that the price of a dozen eggs is down significantly. It was down in March from February, down in April from March. There's the latest numbers we have. The price of a dozen eggs still about 80% higher than it was at this point last year, but they're coming on down, and there's no better way to celebrate National Egg Day than, I don't know, over easy, over medium, scrambled, in a quiche, however you take your eggs these days.
Moshe, I prefer my eggs in an omelet.
Okay.
I don't know about you.
No, omelet is a solid way to take your eggs. I should say I got my start, not in journalism, but one of my early jobs was as a pancake house waiter at Walker Brothers in Lincolnshire, Illinois. So those of you in the Chicago area, you know Walker Brothers has a lot of locations. I was a waiter. If you went to a Walker Brothers location between 1998 and 2001, I may have served you. And Jill, they're known for their omelets. They have I think I remember a Western omelet. They had a veggie omelet, a whole variety of omelet offerings there at Walker Brothers. This podcast is not sponsored by Walker Brothers because I will say this, Jill. The only job I've ever been fired from.
What happened?
Walker Brothers.
What happened?
I complained I was getting bad tables, and I may have not said it in the most productive way to the head waitress, putting it kindly. I think I was a bit obnoxious about it, and so they canned me, as they say in the restaurant world. They 86'd me. But it's okay because I wasn't in it to win it.
I wasn't for you, obviously.
I wasn't going to go start my own pancake house at some point. I was already, I was just using it for the cash.
While I would love to talk more about how you first got fired, I do want to mention I was at the supermarket the other day, and for the first time when I was buying eggs, the supermarket had a sign that said eggs were, and it said $7 and something cents. And they're now, and it was about $4 and change, which is pretty good. And it was like, oh, I feel good about this. Okay.
One of the few things in life where the prices can actually go down. It's like gas and eggs. Like, we hate when they go up, but they actually come back down. Everything else just goes up. It just goes up.
All right, Moshe, let's get to some headlines here. Some new details emerging as the suspect in the Boulder, Colorado attack is charged with federal hate crimes, what was found at the scene, what he is telling law enforcement, plus what we are learning about the victims. One is a Holocaust survivor.
Jill, a lot of details here, including how this guy wants credit for this attack, is very proud of it, and says that he would totally do it again.
It is Pride Month, but don't expect splashy Pride displays at many of your favorite stores. Why companies are quietly scaling back their Pride celebrations amid DEI backlash. Russia and Ukraine hold a second round of peace talks just one day after a Ukrainian attack deep inside Russia. Are they any closer to a deal? A transgender high school athlete won 2 state titles in California. Why President Trump tried to bar her from competing. In travel news, a runway has reopened ahead of schedule at Newark's Liberty Airport. Why one aviation safety expert says every airport in America could soon experience the travel meltdown that we saw at Newark this spring.
And a wild story, sticking with Newark, Jill, about a 2-year-old who took a joyride down the baggage carousel from departures to arrivals. But everything's okay. Watch your toddler. I'll watch mine if you watch yours, Jill.
It is hazy in the Midwest this week and dusty across the Gulf Coast states. We'll tell you about the weather events in other countries that are driving conditions here at home. In medical news, what we're learning about how diet and exercise can help fight cancer. And Moshe, the newest Gen Z versus millennial debate. Do you like to open a tab at the bar or pay for each drink as you go? Your answer could reveal whether you're a millennial or a Gen Zer. We'll explain.
Jill, this was fascinating. We ran the experiment internally at Mo News between our millennial employees and our Gen Z employees, and this appears to be a thing. That said, Jill, I still have a tab open, so you can always get a drink on my tab.
Well, you're a millennial.
Well, exactly. I just open the tab and leave it open.
and then forget your credit card.
and totally forget the credit card. Be like, where did I leave it last night?
And Moshe has on this day in history.
Jill, the incredible story of King Edward VIII, abdicating the throne for his American love on this day in history.
All right, our top story, the man who used a flamethrower and Molotov cocktails to set Jewish people on fire Sunday in Boulder, Colorado, has been charged with a federal hate crime and multiple state felony charges. 45-year-old Mohammed Soliman's been in custody since just after the attack. 12 people were injured, some of whom are in their late 80s, and some have significant burns. Soliman's being held on a $10 million bond, and he faces a slew of felony charges, including the use of an incendiary device. He faces 16 counts of first-degree attempted murder. 8 of those counts are for attempted murder with intent and after deliberation. The other 8 counts are attempted murder with extreme indifference. As for the motive here, officials say Soliman told them he wanted to kill all Zionists and would attack them again if he could. Zionism, by the way, is a belief that the Jewish people have the right to self-determination and the right to a country in their ancestral homeland, the land of Israel. So it's basically just believing in the right of Israel to exist. Soliman says he wants to kill anyone who believes that, and said that he was trying to stop them from taking over, quote, our land, which he explains to be Palestine. He said he was proud of the attack and would do it again. Here is acting U.S. Attorney J. Bishop Gruel talking about Soliman's state of mind.
And when he was interviewed about the attack, he said he wanted them all to die. He had no regrets, and he would go back and do it again.
Federal authorities say that Soliman had been planning the attack for a year. He is an Egyptian citizen. He entered the United States in August of 2022 on a B-2 visa, typically reserved for tourists. It expired in February of 2023. He was then granted a 2-year work authorization in March of 2023. It expired earlier this year. So he has been living undocumented for a couple of months now. He applied for asylum in September of 2022. He's been attempting to stay in the country via that claim. And Moshe, as bad as the attack was, it could have been much worse. Authorities say he threw 2 Molotov cocktails, but had more than a dozen other incendiary devices in his possession. We also learned Monday afternoon from Boulder police that he wanted to buy a gun, but he was undocumented, so he could not. He told investigators he researched on YouTube how to make Molotov cocktails, purchased the ingredients to do so, and then constructed them. He's lived in Colorado Springs with his wife and 5 children. He says he waited until after his daughter's graduation before he conducted the attack. Federal investigators say he told them he had planned to escape after the attack, saying that he left an iPhone hidden at his house in a desk with messages to his family, as well as a journal. That is according to the affidavit.
So he's being held on $100 million bond right now. The affidavit alleging that Soliman basically scoped out this group for about a year and a half, knew that they gathered on behalf of the hostages every week. They would hold these walks in Boulder. So he made that 100-mile plus drive from his home, Colorado Springs, to Boulder to conduct the attack, again, waiting for his daughter's graduation, given that, he's going to be facing here, Jill, life in prison for this attack. What's interesting, Jill, about how this all unfolded is how public he was. There's the videos that came out on Sunday of him yelling at people during the attack, sticking around afterwards. The fact that he had about 16 more devices ready to go, didn't make use of them. He was arguing with people. He was watching the people who he attacked burn. He also had this backpack-style garden sprayer that was filled with gas that they suspect he used partially to spray gas in the direction of the marchers, so to cover them in gas and then light them on fire. Just a horrific attack here, Jill. During the attack, he was yelling things like "End Zionism," "How many children have you killed?" "Free Palestine." His mugshot that came out yesterday, he's grinning ear to ear. It also appears he may have injured himself in the attack. One of his ears was covered up with a bandage, and he may have partially burned himself during the attack as well. The White House reacting to this, a number of national officials reacting to this. I should note President Trump posting yesterday that the attack will, in all caps, not be tolerated. He came in, and this is where it gets political very quickly, through what Trump called Biden's ridiculous open border policy, which has hurt the country so badly. He must now go out under Trump policy. I'm going to keep the border secure. My heart goes out to the victims of this tragedy, is a bit of what was said there at the White House. You also had Caroline Leavitt, the spokesperson, say it's a privilege, not a right, to enter the United States, and we're not going to allow people who are pushing anti-American values and engaging in acts of violence to remain in our country. Still pretty remarkable, Jill, the admission that he was trying to buy a gun and that he was unsuccessful, so he turned to the Molotov cocktail here. The victims here range in age from 52 to 88. Talking about people in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s here. The 88-year-old is a mother and a Holocaust survivor who was at the march with her daughter, and a friend of hers telling a local station her life wasn't easy, but she is just a bright light. So wishing all of them a very quick recovery, several of them still in the hospital as of this recording on Monday evening.
So the victims were participating in Run for Their Lives. It is a global run, rather a walk event organized by members of the Jewish community to bring attention to the 58 hostages who remain held in Gaza. The walks are across the country, held on Sundays, organized in local communities around the globe. Organizers specifically encourage participants not to protest, but they keep the gatherings quiet and respectful. In many cases, Moshe, they're calling for a ceasefire because their goal is to get the hostages back. Jewish leaders in response calling for more action against attacks on their community in the wake of rising anti-Semitic violence and threats. If you remember, less than 2 weeks ago, 2 Israeli embassy staff members were shot dead in Washington, D.C. outside of a Jewish museum by an attacker who yelled "Free Palestine" while being arrested. More than 9,000 anti-Semitic incidents were reported across the U.S. in 2024. That is a 5% increase from the year prior, which also saw a large increase, and it marks the highest total of incidents since tracking began in 1979, and a 900% increase over the past decade. Moshe, I found this insight from former top law enforcement and national security official John Miller on CNN pretty notable, as he was talking about a rather disturbing trend here.
One thing that strikes me, though, Casey, is just like the shooting at the Capitol Jewish Museum in late May, what you see is an individual who has a very tight plan to do something that's low-tech, low cost, but that is going to have a real impact, who then remains on the scene. He's not looking to escape. He's not looking to fight it out with police. In both cases, they just stayed there and they owned these acts. And this is somewhat unusual.
Yeah, Jill, typically, for most attackers, they have a couple typical MOs. One, they conduct a crime and then they escape. They want to elude authorities to either get away with it or conduct future attacks. So that's typically one MO, right? You commit a crime and you try to escape the scene and not get arrested. And then 2 is suicide by cop, they call it, which is you conduct the attack and then you hope to engage law enforcement and die in a shootout, either seeking infamy and fame in some way in that way, or just due to, the variety of issues you may have, that's an easier way to go than having to take your own life. So that's typical here. And John Miller, by the way, and I go way back. He was a CBS law enforcement analyst when I was at CBS for a decade. He has a lot of experience at the federal level. He ran counterterrorism in New York and a variety of places. So he's observed a lot of these. And so that's why his analysis here, is striking that in these cases, in the Shapiro case, in the Jewish Museum case, in DC, and now in this case, these guys just hung out. They waited for the cops to arrest them. They wanted to see how this goes. They wanted to take credit for this. In the Jewish Museum case in D.C., the guy literally walked into the museum, pretended like he was a victim, had them bring him water. He hung out there, and at some point he's like, yeah, by the way, free Palestine, and he starts, taking credit for the thing to victims that, are watching 2 people die on the street in front of them. So, a remarkable thing here that these people are so warped in their mentality and so warped in their ideology that they are like, no, I want to see how this goes, and I want credit for this, and I want to see the coverage of this, and I want to be made to be a hero here. And in some cases, you have seen that, especially in the Jewish Museum case. This guy, there's GoFundMe's for him and a whole variety of things. In the case of Elias Rodriguez, the shooter at the Jewish Museum, he's raised hundreds of thousands of dollars off of this. There's people who are like claiming this guy is a hero. And so just another terrible element of these cases.
All right, now to a major change being noticed from big brands as Gay Pride Month gets underway this June. For several years, Pride has been a big marketing event for national brands who have adorned their merchandise and logos with the Pride rainbow flag to signal their support for LGBTQ plus Americans. This year, those displays may not be as prominent as they have been in recent years. About 40% of companies say they plan to scale back on public Pride Month festivities, according to a recent survey of more than 200 corporate executives. And that includes sponsoring Pride events, posting supportive messages of LGBTQ rights on social media like rainbow logos, and also selling Pride-themed merchandise. Consumer brands are worried about provoking right-wing customers and activists, and also fear reprisals from the Trump administration, which has been threatening to investigate companies' diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI programs. In 2024, conservatives organized boycotts of brands that promoted and sold Pride Month-related products. Activists rallied supporters using hashtags and slogans like, quote, "Go woke, go broke," and held boycotts, which really did cut into sales.
One of the stores that has taken incoming from both the left and the right recently is Target, which was forced to move its Pride displays from the entrances to the back of the stores after conservative activists confronted employees, vandalized displays last year in particular. You might have seen some of those viral videos. The backlash last year against Target in particular was driven by allegations that it was selling swimwear designed for transgender kids. Now, the store says they only sold adult sizes, but that included an extra small size that some felt could be targeted or geared towards kids. Again, Target said, no, this is just for adults. But the backlash was real, and it has been felt. And so now, in many cases, Target is scaling back its displays even further. In many cases, not carrying most things in the stores. Some of the items still available online, though. And so the right protested Target, feeling that they were too woke, quote unquote, too woke. And then you had the backlash here and Target making its various moves. So now you have folks on the left, on the progressive left, who are like, I can't believe Target totally folded to the right here. I'm protesting Target. So you're seeing that with Target. You're seeing that with Bud Light as well. Remember, Bud Light still struggling after the conservative backlash to their social media campaign with transgender influencer Dylan Mulvaney. And then, of course, they reversed themselves. And then the left, some people on the left went after Bud Light. And there has been this accusation in recent years of what they call rainbow washing here, Jill, where immediately you wake up on June 1st. And this is what was so notable waking up on June 1st this year on Sunday, is typically all the logos go to rainbow logos, right? Like BMW and, various sports brands and various retailers. All the logos go to rainbow on social media, on X, on Instagram. And you haven't really seen that much. I mean, there's still some sports franchises. You've seen it with some of the leagues this year, but nothing like we've seen in years past.
Yeah, according to a GLAAD Ipsos poll taken last year, 2 out of 3 Americans are neutral to positive about Pride merchandise in stores. Nearly 3/4 of Americans are neutral or feel positively about a company offering Pride merchandise. Even so, Target says will only be displaying its Pride merchandise this year in, quote, select stores, while other brands, including Kohl's, Macy's, Nordstrom, and Gap, haven't publicized their plans for Pride Month. Business leaders appear eager to steer clear of this country's culture wars. Transgender issues in particular have emerged as a conservative flashpoint. Hundreds of bills restricting LGBTQ rights have been introduced. Dozens have passed. Harassment and violence targeting gay and trans people have also surged.
Jill, this comes as transgender athletes in women's sports and girls' sports continues to be an issue over the weekend in California. The California State Championship for track and field was held, and notably, A.B. Hernandez, a junior from Harappa Valley High School, took first place in girls' high jump and triple jump at the state championship. Now, Hernandez is trans, and this led to a very loud debate in the days ahead of the matchup, including President Trump, who called on Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, not to allow the trans athlete to compete. Now, ultimately, the meets took place over the weekend, and the trans athlete competed and obviously won a couple of competitions. But there were significant changes made by the California Interscholastic Federation. They handle the rules and regulations when it comes to competitions at this level. And they changed some of the rules to allow for multiple first place winners. So that meant that over the weekend, though Hernandez technically finished in first place, the next up female athlete also got to be in first place. So they literally shared the podium with one another. Ultimately, they found this to be a compromise here, what they hope is a compromise between those who do not believe trans athletes should be competing and potentially beating out women and girl athletes, and those who think it's okay. And so they've come up with this compromise in California that they hope works, where effectively they allow in an extra female competitor, and then again, biological female athletes basically compete against one another when it comes to who finishes in the final placements there, that they don't then finish the next rung down if a trans athlete finishes ahead of them.
So in some ways, this is California Governor Gavin Newsom trying to find a bit of a middle ground. A spokesperson saying that the policy was a respectful way to navigate a complex issue. Newsom caused a little tension between himself and some progressive Democrats earlier this year after he appeared on Charlie Kirk, a conservatives podcast, and said that trans athletes participating in women's and girls' sports was, quote, deeply unfair.
Yeah, and it comes, Jill, as you've seen a shift on this issue. They call it an 80-20 issue. If you look at the polling, 80% of Americans do not believe that trans athletes should be able to compete in a women's and girls' sports. And so you've seen, a number of Democrats acknowledge that, especially as they saw how this issue resonated for Donald Trump in the fall against Kamala Harris.
Okay, time for the speed read from the Washington Post. Ukraine and Russia on Monday held a second round of direct peace talks in Istanbul. The two countries agreed to swap dead and captured soldiers, but otherwise there was no significant progress towards ending the war or even agreeing to a ceasefire. They agreed to exchange gravely wounded prisoners of war, captives under the age of 25, and the bodies of about 6,000 killed soldiers from each side. In Monday's talks, Ukraine called for the return of Ukrainian children that they say were taken by Russia's forces from the occupied territories in the country's east, and said that the return of at least half of the children would be a positive indication that Russia is committed to the peace process. The Russian delegation denied kidnapping any children and say instead that Russian soldiers saved them and that they are searching for their parents. In truth, in 2023, the International Criminal Court issued warrants for President Vladimir Putin and others on war crimes of, quote, unlawful deportation and unlawful transfer of children from Ukraine. Ukraine proposed holding another round of talks at the end of the month.
This takes place after that major attack we told you about in yesterday's podcast over the weekend, Ukraine's largest ever air assault on Russia, including up in Siberia, bases 2,000 miles away from the border, a year and a half planned operation. It took out more than 40 aircraft, 40 Russian bombers and significant aircraft there. In retaliation, Russia then launched its largest assault of the war, firing over 470 drones and missiles, resulting in a number of casualties and damage across Ukraine. Nonetheless, the talks continue here. Trump has been pushing both sides to come to a deal here. He's grown increasingly frustrated with the Russians in particular in recent weeks here. And the U.S. has proposed a 30-day unconditional ceasefire, something Ukraine has agreed to, but Russia has not.
From the Associated Press, Newark Airport reopened a runway on Monday, concluding a $121 million renovation project nearly 2 weeks ahead of its projected completion date. Moshe, that's something we don't hear every day.
They are very proud of it. Sean Duffy, the Transportation Secretary, says, look at this. We are ahead of schedule. And that's something, Jill, that we're not used to when it comes to aviation in general.
Or construction in general. The early reopening is expected to alleviate some of the operational constraints that have plagued the airport in recent months. The FAA had imposed a cap of 28 arrivals and 28 departures per hour at Newark. But with the runway now operational, the FAA plans to increase the number by 6 more arrivals and 6 more departures per hour. And in an effort to restore confidence among travelers, United Airlines, which operates about 70% of the flights at Newark, announced plans to increase daily flights by more than 80 flights to about 380 flights a day. The airline had previously reduced operations because of the airport's operational challenges.
All right. But I think the floppy disks are still going to be there, Jill, for a bit longer. And the thing is, it's not just Newark, folks. We've had situations across the country here because ultimately it's the larger system that needs to be updated in the billions and billions of dollars. And they're hoping to get congressional approval here and begin the upgrade and the build out. They hope to get it done in 4 years' time. Apparently that is very optimistic. But that's a major issue. The FAA has a backlog of billions of dollars in maintenance. They only allocate a certain amount in maintenance every year. They keep trying to upgrade these systems. They're going to next generation. But by the time they get around to next generation, they've already passed that generation. And this has been one of the big issues here. And to your point, they've opened the runway. Yay, you still need people to talk to the planes that are landing and taking off from said runway. So it is good, but there are larger issues here when it comes to air traffic controllers. And remember, this is a very demanding job. You retire at a younger age. There's certain requirements there, training. The salary is good, but it's a very high stress situation. And so you still have those air traffic controllers on leave from Newark due to the stress of some of those incidents where the radar went out and comms went out in recent months. Jill, because it feels like Newark airports are the new Florida, there's yet another headline about Newark Airport on a separate wavelength. You know how Florida gets like all this like a Florida man, a Florida man, a Florida man headlines. When it comes to Newark Airport, we learned yesterday that last month, get this, a toddler, a 2-year-old, managed to go on a joyride inside the airport's Terminal A, slipping behind the JetBlue ticket counter, accessing the conveyor belt luggage system, somehow ended up in the checked baggage on the lower level. The kid just got in and like wrote it down. I mean, Jill, with the overweight bags and who even knows how that system works in there? Oh my God, a very lucky situation. They were able to track down the child, grab the 2-year-old down at arrivals after, again, it made its way from departures, conveyor belt. Thank God everyone's okay. But what happened?
You turn around for 1 second, Moshe.
That's it. Let's hope Grace and Olivia. No, they're much like we are getting to the point though. I'm at like 21 months now with Olivia, where like you think you have 5 seconds to like open the refrigerator, and then you turn around and you're like, where did she go? And that's like in the apartment itself without a conveyor belt. But wild incident at Newark Airport. Everyone's like, what's going on at Newark? I'm like, I think this is just unlucky for Newark. Like Newark does have like legitimate issues. It just so happened that the 2-year-old jumped onto the JetBlue conveyor belt
and no one noticed. No one. Bizarre.
Well, I think the parents know. Like, where's my kid? I mean, maybe
no
the
one
kid was
working there. I mean,
I imagine I'm going to dig around local news right now. I want to see if the family will speak out. But I don't know. If I was the parents in that case, I probably would not put my face on camera.
It is the dream, though, if you're a kid, to ride that conveyor belt.
Maybe at like 6 or 7. At 2, I feel like that's a little scary.
Exactly. There's like a sweet spot, like a 6-7-year-old. I think it's the dream.
Like,
I think
like
for
you
a
can't
2-year-old,
know too much. By 9 or 10, you're like, oh my God, bad things could happen to me. At 2, you just have no idea what you just did. At 6 or 7, you kind of like, you're like, sort of, yay.
All right, from ABC News, smoke from over 180 active wildfires in Canada is significantly impacting air quality across the Midwest, including Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Ohio. Major fires are burning across Canada from British Columbia to Ontario, and they have produced extensive smoke plumes that have drifted south, leading to hazy skies and air quality alerts throughout the Midwest. The smoke has reduced visibility and created vivid red sunsets throughout the region, but it has also turned skies a bit hazy as far south as northern Florida. The wildfires have already forced the evacuation of over 25,000 people in Canada.
Remember, we've been here before. Wildfires in Canada burning in 2023, 2024 were pretty significant. And we dealt with the smoke down here on this side of the border as well. Already, we're seeing a pretty significant acreage burned up there in Canada. 2 years ago this month, smoke from the Canadian wildfires blanketed cities across the East Coast. You might remember that orange haze above New York, Jill, and other areas of the country. We're recording air quality indexes in the 300s, even 400 at times. Though, again, folks on the West Coast are like, welcome to the party, East Coast. We've been dealing with this for a number of years. Nearly 3 million acres have already burned in Canada this year. And one of the situations you have in Canada is a lot of these are uninhabited areas. And so getting to them and being able to put them out is incredibly challenging.
And then there's this story from the New York Times that a giant plume of Saharan dust is headed to Florida this week. Weather experts say the transport of dust from the Sahara Desert in North Africa to far-flung places across the globe is one of the greatest wonders that happen with weather and people in Florida. And other Gulf Coast states will get to experience it this week. The dust particles high in the atmosphere will make the sky look soft and warm.
Jill, this happens due to unique conditions over there in Africa between low pressure systems and thunderstorms in Africa. And it creates these significant winds that lift dust from the Sahara Desert up into the atmosphere to 2.5 miles up. Scientists call it the Saharan air layer up there. The dust can then be whisked across the Atlantic Ocean in this conveyor belt of winds known as the African Easterly Jet from east to west, whereas we normally have the jet stream that goes from west to east. And so you might have dust on your car or on your home from Africa in areas like Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas.
Some health news now from the Wall Street Journal. When facing down a cancer diagnosis, patients often ask, what can I do to help my own odds? Well, the answer, according to some new data, is go back to the basics, exercise and a good diet. According to a study released Sunday and published in the New England Journal of Medicine, a structured exercise program with a trainer helped colorectal cancer patients lower their risks of death and cancer recurrence after treatment. The study spanned more than a decade. It is the first to answer conclusively in a controlled trial whether physical activity can improve cancer-related survival. Patients in the program had a 37% lower risk of death after 8 years compared with patients who only received educational information on exercise. The way the study worked, you had 890 patients across 6 countries who had either stage 3 or high-risk stage 2 colorectal cancer, and they were enrolled after getting surgery and chemotherapy. Half received educational materials that promoted physical activity and healthy nutrition. The others were set up with a certified exercise consultant with the goal of adding 2.5 hours of some form of moderately intense exercise a week and sustaining that for 3 years.
So the results here are pretty significant. A lot of doctors saying, based on the study, they wish people would take this seriously, that people are much more prone to like, okay, just give me the pill I got to take every day, than engaging in exercise and diet here. But the patients who underwent this structured program, and that's what's unique here, right? You had a structured program. They followed up with you. You didn't just get the pamphlet promoting physical activity or told to do physical activity, that they had a 28% lower risk of their cancer coming back or developing a new cancer. At 8 years following this, 90% of the patients in the exercise program were alive, compared with 83% of other patients. So significant here, basically doing the math, it prevented 1 death for every 14 people who joined it. This comes as there's a separate study out that was released at a conference over the weekend that eating a diet heavier in foods that research shows can increase inflammation was linked to worse survival overall. So basically, less inflammatory foods, the better. Other researchers were presenting data on how high fiber diets could improve melanoma patients' response to immune boosting drugs. But on the previous thing, chronic inflammation, that is a huge factor here, especially for colon cancer. And that's why there's this renewed focus on diets here. And not surprisingly, it found that eating processed meats, refined grains, sugary beverages was linked to worse survival when it comes to cancer compared to more leafy greens and drinks like coffee and tea here. Jill, a vote for coffee here, at least as compared to sugary beverages.
Okay, I'm doing something right. Although I do put sugar in my coffee.
A little bit. It's not like you're not putting like a Mountain Dew's worth of sugar in your coffee, Jill.
I don't think so. Okay, from
Though I haven't tasted your coffee lately.
And finally, from the New York Times, another debate from the millennial versus Gen Z divide. Do you like to start a tab when you're out at a bar, or do you prefer to close out after every single drink? Well, apparently Gen Z has an aversion to opening bar tabs and actually prefers to close out and pay after every drink. So we know Gen Z in general consumes less alcohol than older generations. So for them, perhaps opening tabs can seem exorbitant. They've also become accustomed to one and done transactions, usually with a simple tap of their phones, and can feel anxious about losing track of their spending by leaving their credit cards behind the bar.
Yeah, so one of the things here, Jill, is that so many people have Apple Pay, so they don't have that credit card to leave behind. You're not going to leave your iPhone with the bartender. But at the same time, they also feel that this also prevents them from drinking more, as opposed to leaving the tab open. It's just easier than order another drink. The idea of having to pay for it every time gives you that extra pause. And this is a trend line we've been covering for a while, which is millennials drink more than Gen Zers. Gen Zers drink much less. There's this whole trend, especially in New York and some other cities, of these like alcohol-free bars or these like bars that are very much focused on mocktails here. So this is seen as just one other element of that trend line. They also feel that budget-wise, given how expensive things are, that leaving the tab open versus paying for each drink individually makes them more conscious of the price of every drink. So they feel that it's better for budgeting purposes. But one group that, not surprisingly, doesn't love this, restaurants and bartenders, they don't like it. It's bad for the bottom line for the bar. It also requires them to have to pay a fee. Every time they swipe your credit card, folks, every time you pay with a credit card, the bar has to pay a fee. So as opposed to leaving the tab open, getting a bunch of drinks on it, one-time fee, every time you swipe it for every single drink, they're paying credit card fees here. And credit card fees have soared 80% over the last few years here. So that's the situation. We did the poll here internally at Mo News. When asked if you'd ever opened a bar tab, show of hands, none of the Gen Zers raised their hands, and all the Millennials raised their hands.
What was interesting, Moshe, is that the Gen Zers almost couldn't even process the idea of opening a tab. It was like, are you guys insane that that's something you would do?
Like, why would you do that? Why would you just leave your credit card with the bartender? I was like, why wouldn't you leave your credit card with the bartender? There's a difference, Jill, between going to bars now and going when, like, you know, Jason Derulo was on repeat.
Jason Derulo.
Right. If you ever went out like during like Akon, Jason Derulo, like peak music, then you left a tab. You didn't want to miss a moment. Music was so good back then, Jill.
And you probably left your credit card at some point in your life at the bar.
Oh, totally. And if you went to multiple bars that night, you're trying to remember which bar still has your card. And then there was like the worst part, which was like sober next day signing for it. Being like, how many drinks
God.
Did I put on my tab?
What did we do?
What did I do? Can someone tell me? And Jill, that was in some cases, smartphone era or camera phone. So like we didn't, folks, hey, Gen Zers, we didn't have pictures of what we did. There was like very little evidence, like just like 6 hours. I don't really remember exactly what took place. I'm revealing too much now about my early 20s, Jill.
Well, Moshe, I was about to add for that, I, for one, am grateful. And it sounds like you are too.
Less photographic and video evidence of that time, the better. All right, we end here with On This Day in History. Beginning on this day in 1937, the Duke of Windsor, formerly Edward VIII, King Edward VIII of Great Britain, marries Wallis Simpson, a divorced American socialite, for whom he actually abdicated the throne the previous year. So King Edward VIII becomes king, says to his government, everyone, hey, I want to marry this American, twice divorced American, Wallis Simpson. They said, no, absolutely not. It will not happen. So he actually loved her so much, he left the throne for her in the previous year in 36. His brother, King George VI, takes over as king. Of course, you might remember King George VI of the King's Speech. You might know his daughter, Queen Elizabeth II. You might know his grandson, King Charles III. Jill, incredible how, little things, in this case, he loved this woman, how they changed the course of history. We would not have Queen Elizabeth II if King Edward VIII had not abdicated. And so fascinating. And then in sort of a darker potential alternate history here, King Edward VIII was sort of friendly with Adolf Hitler. So there might have been some questions there as to what direction England would have taken there should he have remained king just a couple years later when World War II starts. A little bit of space history for you on this day in history. On this day in 1965, Ed White emerges from the Gemini 4 spacecraft, becomes the first American to walk in space. On this day in 1985, TV history, Larry King debuts his show on CNN. Becomes a hugely popular show, Jill. This was like Larry King Live was like the show. He would take calls, from random viewers. Caller. They get to ask their questions of notable politicians and celebrities. And there was like a lovable style to him, right? Because he also would just ask some of the like more ridiculous questions over time. But he was Larry King and people were like, that's cool.
Well, you know what? He was easy to talk to. I think that was his allure, right?
Absolutely. A couple other things we should mention on this day in 1989, the Chinese government crackdown in Tiananmen Square begins. There was a 1 million person march pro-democracy, anti-repression protests happening in China. They cracked down with tanks in Tiananmen Square, resulting in hundreds of deaths, thousands of arrests. And really, we haven't seen that level of protest in China against the regime there in the better part of 3 decades now. We end here with a bit of music and pop culture history. On this day in 2001, The Producers, the musical by Mel Brooks, starring Matthew Broderick and Nathan Lane, wins a record-setting at the time 12 Tony Awards. And we end here on this day in 1967. The Doors release Light My Fire, their classic hit. Jill, they would go on to perform on The Ed Sullivan Show a few months later. But as the censors at The Ed Sullivan Show were prone to do, they would ask for lyric changes that were deemed inappropriate for the audience at the time. So the Doors were told, can you please change the lyric, girl, we couldn't get much higher? The Doors said, sure. The censors at the time were like, well, that's a drug reference, getting much higher. And so can you just change to something else? And Doors were like, yeah, we're totally going to change that. Then they performed the song as is on the show with the lyrics. Needless to say, The Doors, like other music groups, were banned from future appearances on the Ed Sullivan Show. Can't trust a band of 20-somethings to follow their word there for the network censors in the 60s, Jill.
Yeah, they don't care.
The Doors don't. Shame on the Ed Sullivan Show. Oh yeah, no, they assured us they're not going to say the line, "Girl, I couldn't get much higher." But it does also just show you like where we were at that era, like where there's, oh my God, we can't have that reference on television.
Well, when you look at the lyrics now of music, you're just like, oh, okay, nothing left to the imagination.
Cardi B is like, hold my beer. Forget Cardi B, Sir Mix-a-Lot, like 35 years ago. Like,
it's now literal. Like there is now no...
Right, like Snoop Dogg would not have a career. Like this was like, come on, baby, we couldn't get much higher. Snoop Dogg's like, I'm going to just talk about weed. Like The Chronic was an album, right? Dr. Dre.
And now Snoop Dogg is literally the face of the Olympics. So that is where we are, 2025.
Yes, that's where we are. That's where culture has gotten in just about 50 years or so.
All right, everyone. Thank you for listening to the Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It does help us grow. Follow us, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us kindly in the App Store. We really appreciate it, and it helps.
We couldn't get much higher, except in the podcast rankings. We could definitely, that's a literal higher, not like higher, like drug higher. All right, everybody. See you back here tomorrow.
Thanks for listening to the Mo News podcast. Have a fantastic day. I hope you enjoyed.